Ah, Hello everyone, we'll be starting very shortly. We'll also test our remote panelists' voices and we'll be with you in maybe 2 minutes.
I think I'll need your help in terms of unmuting our speakers to do the sound check, if that's okay. If you could unmute Jose Guridi.
Okay, we have video for Jose.
We have video for Jose,
Nice.
and there's Clara.
Clara
Okay.
seems to be good. We can test
Hello.
Clara first.
Great, great. Jose? Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Perfect, perfect. Okay, we're just still waiting on our friends at the OECD.
Barbara, thanks for your help. It's Nicole
Oh, great.
getting us on. Everything
Great.
is good.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
your colleagues over in the OECD building are having a little trouble accessing it from the OECD system. So you guys were lucky.
Thank you. And Barbara, for my part, you need me to just signal when there's a hand raised?
Yes, just
Or-
just indicate that. And everybody in the room is hearing us.
Okay, super. Okay. I will be pleased to do
Yeah,
that. And
great.
I'll keep an eye on the chat. Thank you.
Perfect. Oh goodness.
I'll do a PowerPoint with the thing I send you and I'll share straight from my Zoom client. That
Okay.
should do it now.
Yeah. No, poor Corinne is having. Oh, okay. No, I don't. I don't see Corinne. Norberto, can you unmute yourself or to do a sound check?
Yes.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We're having technical problems with one of our speakers, and that individual is trying to get on another computer. 60 seconds, I think. Good afternoon, everyone. While we continue to resolve this technical issue, why don't we just get started? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as we say in the world of ICANN. Everyone who is joining workshop number 58, Realizing Trustworthy AI through Stakeholder Collaboration, either here in person or virtually. My name is Barbara Warner. I'm Vice President of ICT Policy at the U.S. Council for International Business, and I will be moderating this workshop. We were one of the co-organizers. I think we can agree that artificial intelligence carries great promise for driving economic growth and improving lives. This innovative technology has the potential to revolutionize how we live, work, learn, discover, and communicate, and most important for this UN body, help to realize many of the Sustainable Development Goals. We've heard this theme over and over again. We're only on day one of the IGF, and we've already heard this theme reiterated in several different sessions, so this may sound like a repetitive theme. Yesterday, a high-level session and at least one other workshop delved into the transformative potential of AI. These discussions also highlighted concerns about the potential use and misuse of AI, which risks undermining personal privacy and online security protections, supporting decision-making biases that exacerbate social inequality, and causing disruptions in the labor market, among other possible pitfalls. One of the speakers said, very aptly, I thought, algorithms should not run away from us or out of our power. They should be explainable and transparent. A human-centric, human oversight remains critical to ensuring trustworthy deployment of AI. The OECD's groundbreaking AI principles, which were adopted in 2019 and involved inputs from all stakeholder groups, aim to shape a stable policy environment at the international level to foster trust in and adoption of AI in various aspects of society. The 5 values-based principles and 5 recommendations for government policymakers indeed promote a human-centric approach to trustworthy AI to which all stakeholders are encouraged to aspire. Again, already at the IGF, we have heard different approaches to ensuring trustworthy AI, different frameworks, such as the UNESCO AI ethics recommendation and the Council of Europe's initiative to develop a binding convention on AI. This workshop, however, will utilize the OECD AI principles as the foundation for implementing tools and processes to ensure the trustworthy use of AI to realize economic development and social welfare needs. So indeed, the algorithms do not run away from us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our workshop speakers who are generously considering their considerable expertise to this discussion. Many of them are participating remotely, so you are aware of the technical problems that sometimes entails. First, we have Norberto Andrade, who's Global Policy Lead for Digital and AI Ethics at Meta. Mark Dadesgeld, who is a scholar and internet governance expert from São Paulo State University in Brazil. Jose Guridi, who until recently was head of the Future and Social Adoption of Technology, or FAST, as it goes by the acronym unit, at Chile's Ministry of the Economy, but now has a teaching position at Cornell University in the USA. Clara Nepo, who is Senior Director of European Business Operations for IEEE. As many of you know, this is the world's largest technical professional organization dedicated to standards development. And fingers crossed, we have Corinne Persay, who is head of OECD.ai, and she is joined by her courageous, technically heroine, OECD colleague Francesca Schica, who is an OECD AI policy consultant. Also, I would like to acknowledge our rapporteur, Maëlys Berveillet of Business at OECD, who is one of the co-organizers of this workshop, and Nicole Primer, also of Business at OECD, who will be serving as the online moderator. But before we begin this discussion, I'd like to level set things by involving everyone in the room and online to participate in an online poll. So if we could launch the poll. Oh, thank goodness. Okay, why don't, maybe we'll just go here with a show of hands until we get the technical elements worked out. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, and you can just raise your hands here, how would you rank your level of trust that artificial intelligence currently is being used in a responsible, human-centric manner? 1 would be the lowest, oh, here we go, yay! So, fire away, folks. 1 would be the lowest level of trust, 10 would be the highest. It should be on, if you are logged in on your Zoom account, if you are logged in to this session, it's available through the Zoom link. Okay? Oh, here we go, here we go. Oh, this is great. Okay, so I think we're off to a great start. I think we have a receptive audience. We have 9% who do not have much trust in how AI is being deployed in a trustworthy manner currently. 73% are sort of in the middle. They are encouraged by what they see, and then 18% are pretty trustworthy. Regard AI deployment as fairly trustworthy. So we'll see how these numbers may change at the following our discussion. I hope they do, because I think all of our experts bring a lot of expertise to the discussion here. Okay, so let's jump in and learn more about the OECD's AI principles. Corinne and Francesca, first I want to acknowledge that the OECD's AI work has exploded since the adoption of the principles to include the online AI Observatory. This includes information that can be accessed by anyone, and this is a tremendous resource for every business or government to tap. So this is my public service announcement to everyone participating that there is indeed a wealth of information available online courtesy of the OECD that you might use to model your own approaches to ensuring human-centric and trustworthy deployment of AI. But back to the all-important OECD AI principles. Corinne, if you could briefly walk us through the 5 value-based principles and the 5 recommendations for government policymakers to promote this human-centric approach to trustworthy AI. I believe Corinne has, here she is, great. You unmute yourself, Corinne, and take it away. We have your slides visible on the screen.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you? Oh, okay. So let me get started if you can hear me. I've had a lot of connectivity problems. I'm really sorry about that. This is the first time I've had such bad problems, but I don't know if you can see my screen. If you could just nod if you can. Okay, fabulous. Basically what I'll give you a good afternoon. I'm really happy to join this panel, and thank you, Barbara, for the kind invitation. I'll give a brief overview of the OECD's work on AI policy, and then on the OECD AI principles that are the foundation for that work, and then on the work that we've been conducting to implement that. So first of all, we'll go over, 3 main topics. Why is AI important? Second, the OECD AI principles, and third, our work since 2019 to put these principles into practice. So we know AI is here now. It's reshaping economies and societies. It's a crucial part of our lives. Barbara, you already mentioned that. It's bringing tremendous opportunities for people and planet. At the same time, it's presenting risks that need to be addressed. So what we've done is we've developed the OECD AI principle back in 2019, and these are the first intergovernmental standard on AI that was adopted by, to date, 44 countries, OECD members and non-countries, and then the G20 AI principles were drawn from the OECD AI principles. So these principles were originally OECD and a number of other countries, partner countries, and they're open to any country. And their goal is really to create a policy ecosystem for trustworthy AI that benefits people and planet. And so they consist of 10 principles, 5 values-based principles for trustworthy human-centric AI. And so these are basically the values that AI systems should reflect and the rights that should be protected, and things like benefiting people and planet, respecting human rights, values and fairness, transparency and explainability, robustness, security and safety and accountability. And then on the right-hand side, recommendations for national policies, so AI ecosystems benefit society. So this is more on the enabling environment side and really on the national AI policies side. And so our work is really structured into those two components, the values-based principles and trustworthy AI, and then the enabling environment. And so this is just the countries that have signed up to these OECD AI principles, and it shows you that the coverage is quite broad, but that we're still missing a significant portion of the world, and in particular, you can see that Africa is an area where significantly more engagement is and effort is needed. Although we're working with many partners on that front, including organizations like UNESCO, the World Bank, and others. So putting the principles into practice, I'll just go over this quickly. Basically, we've launched a policy observatory, which is a platform containing resources on AI, basically to inform policies. This is resources from trends in data on comparing countries over time and on a cross-country basis. How are they doing in which areas? For example, in software development, how are they doing in research, R&D? How are they doing in a whole set of areas? And there are quite surprising results and trends also in the terms of the growth trends. I won't go over them now. Just to say, we also have a database of national policy initiatives that covers over 75 countries to date now, and that's growing every day. So I'll not go through much. I think I'll jump quickly. I was just going to show you a little bit.
Yes, Karine, I was going to, that slide that you presented at the November meeting of the OECD's Internet Governance Working Party, I thought was very compelling in terms of providing the core themes of define, assess, treat, govern. Can you walk us through that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So basically, here, over the past couple of years, we've seen convergence around the world towards risk-based approaches for AI policy throughout the AI system lifecycle, and so we're that approach of adapting AI policy to risk levels is also the approach taken in the OECD AI principles. And in the same vein, so I'll structure a few key points around this slide, and make a few points. I think
Karine,
really
your notes are showing. Is there any way that you can reduce them? Your comments are also visible. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, sorry about that. Today is not the right day for the connectivity. So what I wanted to start with is basically, first in terms of so we've structured our work around this basically a basic risk management approach. A standard risk management stage is the first defining the AI risk context, second assessing AI risks, third treating and addressing AI risk, and fourth and last governing AI risk, which includes kind of monitoring and reviewing that. And so first, in terms of defining the context, The risk context, AI is a really broad term. So the starting point is to refine what we mean by AI. So we developed an OECD definition back in 2019 as a machine-based system that can, for human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions that influence real or virtual environments. And then there's more detail to that, but that's the core definition. So we focused on ensuring that it was future-proof, i.e., that includes not just today's AI systems, but also emerging types of AI systems and AI use cases that we can't necessarily predict today. And even in the 3 years, and a half since the principles were adopted, we've seen the emergence of really totally different types of AI systems, who, for example, whose objectives are not always clearly specified by humans, like with large language models today, such as GPT-3, that will use general guidance rather than detailed human specifications. So anyways, just to say that what are we talking about is the first step. And then the second step is really that different AI applications and use cases carry really, really different risks. And here, using an e-commerce AI recommendation system to order shoes has nothing to do with using AI to detect cancer in an X-ray. And that's why the way we manage risk depends on the context. And so to define the context and identify risks, we developed a framework to classify AI systems that build on the definition with questions like, is the AI using personal data? Is it explainable? Does it use by what types of data does it use? Personal data, biased data? What sector is it used in? And we need a lot of information, well, quite a bit of information, so to allow us to treat different AI systems differently. And we also need to define the values or principles that are most important to us. And so I think we've seen a lot of convergence and there's a lot of similarity between, for example, the OECD AI principles, the ones we're most familiar with, but they're very aligned with, for example, the EU AI principles and the UNESCO's AI principles and many others. And so basically that they enshrine the same and the NIST principles in the United States, and they do enshrine the most important values and rights to be protected. Um, and then moving on to assessment here. So building on that classification framework I mentioned, we've been working on approaches to assess risk in an interoperable way with lots of national and international experts and stakeholders like the, ISO, IEEE, the Council of Europe, the European Commission, Sentinec, and many others at the national level and international level. So here I would say, and UNESCO obviously and the World Bank are key partners as well. And from the OECD perspective, and I think this perspective is shared with a lot of our partners, we think that there's a window of opportunity right now to seek the right regulatory balance and ensure interoperability, ideally ahead of laws and standards being finalized and enacted. And then they become a lot more difficult to change. So they can be changed and updated, but it's just more difficult, particularly so that we all can use similar concepts and terminology and decrease the burden on those who will have to implement these frameworks, particularly companies, but also in the case of governments, e-government services. If we have if we can identify those commonalities and map these different frameworks one to the other, I think um, we can make it if we can improve the effectiveness of implementation and then also make enforcement a lot easier. And here the common denominator really seems to be about standards, as for example, with the ISO's work, the Sentinelec work that is starting to implement the EU AI Act and the risk management framework of the US National Institute for Science and Technology, the IEEE, of course, which actually was a precursor in all of these areas, and others. So the really, risk-based approaches, and then implemented through standardization and specific standards. And then third here, to treat and address risks, we've got lots of tools in front. My colleague Francesca will dig into, some of the more legal, the legislative tools, and then interpreting existing legislation in light of new elements brought by AI. But on top of, and then experimentation and things like that. But in addition to that, we really need practical tools and educational approaches. I think those are really critical, and at kind of a starting point. And organizations need, tools to remove bias from AI systems, or tools to test how secure a system is against attacks. But it's very hard for individual actors to find the right tools for their needs. There are a lot of tools out there, fabulous tools, for example, documentation processes for data and models that by large technology players, or educational tools like Finland's Elements of AI educational programs. And there are many, there are hundreds and hundreds of very high quality tools. And so we've been working with NIST, actually jointly with NIST, on building a catalog of tools and metrics for trustworthy AI. With NIST and other partners from all stakeholder groups, from business, technical community, and governments, and civil society as well, academia too. And so we'll launch this, I think now early in the new year. So this will be the new year gift. And then fourth and last in here, my colleague Francesca will maybe say a little more later. There are, a lot of mechanisms to govern risks, but from legislation to experimentation to standards and so on. But here, I think what the key point that we'd emphasize as the OECD is really to try to do our utmost to promote innovation and to base policy on evidence and on experimentation, as well as to base standards on evidence and experimentation, now that we have the means to do so, and companies like Meta are experimenting with that. And so we have witnessed, a significant increase in the number of legislative proposals and laws, with a lot of momentum in the EU, US, China, and Brazil. But we've also seen more and more interpretation of existing laws for specific AI use contexts, like particularly AI in the workplace. And then a lot of, but not just to focus on legislation, but also all types of policy instruments. And here, I think most governments are not just using one type of tool, of instrument. They're not just using legislation; they're complementing it with a whole gamut of tools. And it's not just governments acting here; it's a lot of co-regulation. It's a lot of self-regulation as well. So we see a lot of emphasis also on corporate governance standards and on sector-specific codes of conduct in countries like the US, the UK, and Singapore. And I'd just like to point out briefly that an avenue that, at the OECD we think can be helpful is to apply an existing legal instrument and its enforcement mechanisms to cover artificial intelligence and its specificities. And here, what I'm talking about is the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct, and it's the associated multinational enterprise guidelines. These could fairly easily and importantly quickly, so it would be very rapid to do this, be applied to responsible business conduct for AI systems. And we see this as potentially very effective to help operationalize trustworthy AI, because in companies of all sizes that operate internationally, because implementing trustworthy AI is really going to require companies' strong engagement, and for them to include AI risk management within their existing risk management frameworks. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Barbara. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Corinne, and you set us up for the next evolution of this workshop, in that I'm very interested in hearing from our other speakers the challenges that have arisen in implementing the OECD AI principles, as Karine mentioned, maybe corporate codes and standards that they have adopted to realize a human-centric, trustworthy approach to AI deployment. Norberto, not long ago, you participated in a very informative webinar organized by Business at OECD, in which you joined business speakers in identifying corporate best practices and key challenges, such as the need for strong AI governance and ensuring that there are structures in place and to secure wider organizational buy-in for development and employment of trustworthy AI. During yesterday's high-level session, we heard about the need for transparency, the need for explainability, the need for accountability. And I know that in that workshop you addressed all of those points, and I would welcome your important insights from Meta's perspective. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Barbara. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
I think so, yeah. First of all, thank you so much for the kind invitation to participate in this panel, to give me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing on these important issues at Meta. I would start by taking a step back and highlighting how for quite some years we've seen so many stakeholders highlighting the need to move from principles to practice. This has been repeated many times. But I think the lingering question is still, what does this actually mean in practice? And I think that one way to answer this was actually a project that we joined, or spearheaded by the business at the OECD, BIAC. I'm happy to see Nicole also on this event, where Meta, alongside other industry partners like AXA, Amazon Web Services, IBM, Microsoft, NEC, and PwC, we embarked on this project where we looked at industry responsible AI practices. And the culmination of this project was a report on implementing the OECD AI principles that Karine just described. And the report, I think, gives really clear examples and specific case studies of how industry is operationalizing the OECD AI principles, and identifies challenges that the industry has faced when going through these type of implementation processes. We contributed specifically with our feature called Why Am I Seeing This? That has to do with AI transparency and explainability. And this was one of the 7 industry case studies that are featured in that report. I think also that this project illustrates how some of these AI companies are already working towards developing and deploying AI in a responsible way, and specifically in line with the OECD principles. The project takes really highlights a specific journey of what it takes to pragmatically move from principles to practice. And at the very high level, I would like just to underscore a couple of important insights that stem from this project. One would be the fact that this is a no-brainer, that the process to put ethical and high-level principles into practice is really not a straightforward one. On the contrary, this is actually a really hard, complex, and unclear endeavor. This process involves difficult decisions, balancing exercises, value-based trade-offs, and technical and operational challenges that will differ according to specific contexts, roles, and also the technological state of art. What is more important to note is that these challenges are not often documented and are not openly discussed. In fact, the technical and operational challenges that are involved in building AI responsibly still tends to be primarily discussed by and within a specialized community of developers, engineers, product managers, data scientists. And this discussion is happening mostly in silos and somewhat separate from the broader non-technical policy community. So through this project and this report, we try to break this silo and shed light by sharing the expertise and the knowledge of the technical community in order to better inform the practical implementation of these principles, by connecting also to the larger policy debate that is happening on AI. So as developers and builders of AI as an industry, we believe that we're in a good position to help. We were very pleased to be part of this project since its conceptualization, and being part of this group of companies that had the opportunity to delve into these case studies on how we were addressing and operationalizing these AI ethical principles. As a complement to this current direction of travel, which is, as I said, moving from principles to practices, what I think was novel and interesting about this project was the fact that we went full circle and we went directly to the practices, to those existing practices, and see how they were moving towards principles. And this meant following a bottom-up approach, looking at how practices can inform principles, evaluating how those concrete practices can actually help clarify, refine, and improve the implementation of principles, hopefully in a way that would contribute to their wider adoption and dissemination. The other important insight from this project was the realization of how companies are implementing these ethical principles in a holistic manner. Although the project was focused on how companies were addressing one specific principle, they were asked to choose one of the OECD AI principles and highlight how they were operationalizing and implementing in practice. I think it's important to note that companies are, the ones that were part of this project, but also many others, are not tackling the operationalization of principles individually or cherry picking specific ones to the detriment of others. This actually is emerging as a collective and holistic effort where we see companies looking and addressing these principles as a whole and acknowledging that they are all intrinsic parts and milestones of the journey that these companies are going through in order to achieve responsible AI. So I would really like to underscore this idea of holistic endeavor that was part of this project. And this actually in practice means acknowledging that these principles need to talk to each other, need to interact with one another. So I will give you just two examples of how this communication and interaction is taking place and should be further taken into account. So one example I will give will be on how the principle of fairness and privacy actually need to talk to each other. And the other one is how the principle of transparency and explainability is more and more so acting as a vehicle through which to externalize how companies are operationalizing many other principles, a sort of kind of an umbrella principle of others. But starting with the interaction between the principle of privacy and fairness, the specific technical literature has stressed that in order to responsibly develop AI systems, there are certain situations in which we need actually to leverage, as developers of these systems, sensitive attributes. And we need to do so in order to mitigate issues of bias and fairness. So in order to actually address potential unfairness, we need to be able to detect it and measure that unfairness. But this is obviously challenging to address because it's difficult to measure something that we cannot do or it's difficult to do. So AI developers actually need access to sensitive data in order to better determine how their AI models are working for people of different races and ethnicities. So what we see here is an interesting challenge and tension between AI and privacy. On the one hand, the collection and processing of sensitive data is needed from an algorithmic fairness perspective. We need to have access to that data, but it's difficult to attain it from a privacy perspective. There's a high threshold of consent for collection of sensitive personal data that is part of many data protection and privacy legislation for very good reasons. So in order to know if models are actually impacting certain groups of people whose defining attributes may amount to this sensitive data, you need to be able to process data about them. Otherwise, we will end up with blind spots and will not be able to know or understand the actual impact of the algorithms and the models that we are building. This is really an interesting and still evolving discussion. We see this also in the EU Act, with the first proposal of the European Commission actually anticipating a specific legal basis for the processing of sensitive data for fairness measurement purposes, and the European Parliament removing in some of its amendments this legal basis. So it's still to be seen how these two principles need to be talking and interacting with one another. The other example will be the principle of transparency and explainability. And as I mentioned,
Noberto,
we see it more and more so.
can you save that for later? Because I wanted to move on to our other speakers
Sure, absolutely.
as we wrap up, because I think this transparency and accountability, or excuse me, and explainability, right, are very important. And one of the points that you made is that they aren't something that is transparent is not necessarily explainable. Something to that effect. The difficulty.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
do you want me to go on, or are we moving to different speakers?
Okay,
Sorry,
why don't we address that later in the discussion?
Sure.
Okay, because I'd like to move on to Mark from civil society, who you are an internet governance scholar and you bring in invaluable global South perspective to our discussion, but you have also done work on the policy implications of generative AI. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how the OECD policy principles may apply to utilizing and deploying that technology?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Barbara. So, hello, everyone. I don't know how much you've been in touch with generative AI. Probably you have. It's been on social media. It's pretty interesting stuff. I was going through this session just before I came here, and I decided, why not just generate something for the session? Because it's pretty fun as well. So, if you have a look at the screens, this is kind of where the potential of generative AI comes into place. So, what would a fun cinematic, IGF meeting look like, right? And as you can see, this particular AI is called Midjourney. It's already pretty advanced, especially considering that it became public pretty much this year. It's in its 4th iteration already, and it's progressing at a ridiculously advanced pace. I've been following it from the start pretty much, which is not saying a lot in terms of time, but in terms of releases, it's been just a flurry of things. And if you have a look at the prompt, it's pretty funny, right? It's the sort of thing that's like, it's very computery, right? So it's a multinational diverse community of men and women reunited in a conference room about technology at the United Nations building. There are exposed fluorescent cables all around surfaces and ceiling, long shots, cinematic lights, volumetric lighting, right? We still have to tell the computer of these things. But what's interesting is Midjourney is just one of many AI that are starting to become able to generate all sorts of multimedia things. We now have one for video as well. We have one for sound. We have one for even Midjourney will progress now towards 3D models. And what's interesting to me about that is, if you all remember just a few years ago, or let's say a year ago, we were discussing deep fakes and, all of that. Yeah, that's in the past now. And we didn't even get to regulate it, right? The discussion didn't even really start. You don't see a lot of regulation on deep fakes and all of that. And that's gone. Now you can generate all of it synthetically. You don't need a primary model to start from. And this is coming very fast, right? So what I usually encounter from the academic sector, I spend part of my time in private sector, and part of it in the academic sector. And from the private sector, people are very excited, opportunities, investments, great. From the academic sector, I think most of my friends are scared is the word, because they can't keep up. It's just a paper after paper after paper. It just keeps coming, and if you blink, you've missed whatever is coming this week. And it's important to ask ourselves exactly how sustainable that is, right, or where we are heading. This has been one of the things that I've been reflecting a lot about lately and trying to discuss with people from different sectors. So where are we going with this, and how fast can we actually keep going, right? So there must be a ceiling to that, but we are nowhere near seeing where that ceiling is. I think that's the kind of the main point. 2022 was a year in which we saw a lot of advance, but there's nothing saying that 2023 and so on won't be the same. It will keep getting faster and faster and faster. And here we are talking about multimedia, but we do have to remember that multimedia is kind of everything in a digital world, right? We are talking about personality, we are talking about impersonation, we are talking about forgery, we are talking about all sorts of things that can come from this. And to be honest, as you can see from my prompt, weird as it may be, like it's too descriptive, but with technologies like GTP3 and all of these models that can ingest massive amounts of data, in case anybody, if anybody's not that technically involved in AI, basically the jump that we saw is because pretty much the learning doesn't have to be linear anymore. You can kind of learn as a big mass, and you can ingest massive amounts of data and just kind of make it into a model. So the thing is, this will be applicable to pretty much everything. Right now we're looking more towards natural language processing and that sort of thing, but pretty much, that hurdle has been overcome, and now this will start being applied to most things in society. So the real question that I think we should be thinking about is, okay, what does it look like in reality when you're developing one of those AI models? And from my limited experience following this particular model that I demonstrated here, it's very chaotic. It's very much an exercise of, okay, how do we make this better? That's always the question. This philosophical, humanitarian questions, they don't come into play. It's very much like it is in software. It's just an extension of how software development works, right? You're always looking towards, okay, how do I make this better? How do I make this more full of features? How do I make this more complete? The social moral implications only come in like the snags, right? So where did this particular AI come into a big problem? It was with matters of nudity and sexuality. And specifically, I don't think they're particularly worried about, the implications for adults, but more about the potential to generate child sex abuse materials, right? It's more about how that would impact them legally. But this is pretty much like a worry about police. It's not about, oh, what about, human rights, right? So it's very practical things that stop the development of the models. And in that sense, where do we draw boundaries? We don't currently. So that's where initiatives like the OECDs come into place with a very strong type of motivation. But the problem is, how do we get that to the actual technical people? That is a question, because if you look at fora like this, there's a lot of people from law. There's a lot of people from government and civil society. Some engineers, some software engineers, but mostly they are not in this kind of space, in this kind of policy development space. So the real question is, now that we know that this is going to just take off, and it will, there's no stopping this, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle, right? So now that we know that, and that we have this kind of toolkit available that asks very important questions, how do we actually involve the developers in this process? Because it's interesting that we discuss this among ourselves, but this bridging will need to happen. How do we accomplish that? Right? We need to kind of start translating what we mean. We need to start kind of trying to understand this better. And this won't just happen overnight, even though the technology is starting to fly very fast. It is happening overnight, but we are not following up with that. So I think that the principles are actually, they ask incredible questions, and they actually address one thing, which is trying to approach policy questions to the technical questions. Right? You have to merge both languages, but the question now is how to make people listen to that. How do we actually interact and interface? And this is where a global internet governance community could come into play, right? We could start engaging more, because we haven't, right? The crux of the matter is we haven't. We have been discussing this for a few years at the IGF, many sessions, but actually engaging with things, not that much. So I look at this set of principles as kind of our chance to have a starting point, to have these conversations, to bring this to other fora, to bring this to engineering, technology conventions, coding competitions, hackathons, anything where the people who are actually developing this are, because I'm pretty sure that they're not, it's not that they don't care, it's more that their goal is to make the software better.
Mark, what you're saying, I think, goes to a point, a couple points. One that Norberto made earlier about breaking down silos, and getting the policy wonks to talk to the engineers. And the second point that was raised in that high-level session yesterday was the importance of education, and perhaps that can be pursued through the IGF or other sorts of consultations, like the hackathon idea is great.
Yeah, for sure. It's exactly that. How do we break that barrier? So, yeah, I'm sorry if my intervention is more of a question than an intervention, but I think that's the time, that this is where we are. We need to start asking different questions. We were asking for a long time, what is AI? What are the implications? Is this going to affect people? Well, it is affecting people. It is here. How do we move to the next step, which is, okay, there are people who are developing this who are not part of these conversations. How do we get to them? What do we want to talk to them about? Which is a very key question. So thank you very much, and I remain open for questions when the time is right. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. Clara, I think this is a nice segue to your expertise. I'm anxious to learn more about the technical implications and standards-related issues posed by growing deployment of AI applications. Again, I keep going back to this Day Zero event because there was just such a wealth of information offered, but at one point there was a discussion about balancing standardization and the desire to customize. So can you help us understand what regulations and standards, and another point, that was made yesterday was the importance of internationalizing and standards and making them interoperable. So can you enlighten us on your thoughts about those points? Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think it's a very interesting discussion that we already have. And I would also like just to, congratulate once again the OECD for the principles. I think I had really the privilege to be part of the development process and also to follow up on different projects on operationalizing the principles. I consider them still a lighthouse for governments and also other actors. So maybe just a few words, because Barbara, you mentioned that we are standard setting organizations, but I think it's important, especially taking into account what was said before by Mark, that we need to build these bridges to just highlight that IEEE is not only a standard setting organization. We are really the world's largest technical associations with different societies. And besides standard setting, we are also very much engaged in public policy. So we have a public policy committee, a global, a European one, and engage as such with the OECD, with the Council of Europe, also what was mentioned before on human rights and implications for different technologies, as well as obviously with the European Commission as well. So I think that these bridges are really important. And when you were, the question was really what kind of challenges do we have when we are operationalizing these principles? Well, I think that by definition, the principles are very high level. So they need to be general. They are setting, let's say, the requirements, and then it's up to us in a multi-stakeholder way to implement those, to first interpret those. I would say. So for instance, when we are discussing about transparency, which I think everybody agrees is important, it's first important to see what do we mean by that? What do we mean by that in that specific context and for the specific stakeholder group? For instance, transparency can mean completely different things for a user, an elderly person who is using an AI system for recommendation and wants to understand why. Then for the engineer who is coming to repair that robot. So it's a completely different level. And this is where standards can help. So we are also developed, is already published, one standard on defining different levels of transparency to just understand what do we mean, by level 1 to up to level 5, which would include explainability, which is, as we all know, still a research question. The same thing goes for when it goes to fairness. I mean, this is one part of it is about the avoidance of bias. But even here, for instance, if we are taking medical applications, we would like actually to have certain kind of bias. We would actually need this bias, for instance, when it comes to gender. We know that men and women react differently when it comes to heart attacks. So we actually would like to favor, let's say, and take into account the system, take into account these biases, which are essential also for accuracy, and to, of course, minimize the other unwanted biases. So this is the first thing about how to understand, how to have a definition, actually, to know and define a common language, which I think is also important to build these bridges, which were met before. Then, of course, the other thing is when it comes to the life cycle. So we need to take into account those principles from the beginning, from the design process to the development process. And we need different instruments for that. So when we're talking about data, we have to define certain metrics also on data quality, processes, on what we have to take into account. Then the design process itself, when we are taking into account the stakeholders, so the ones who will use the system or who will be impacted by the system. This is something which we developers have to learn, and this is also one way to be done by standards. So process standards that actually define the different steps that need to be taken into account when developing these social technical products, as a matter of fact. Here again, I would like to highlight one standard which we already published, and it's also an ISO. So now it's an ISO IEEE standards. It's on value-based design. So it's basically taking it's, I would say, social consultation, taking into account the values of the stakeholders, prioritizing them, and also translating them into concrete system requirements. And here we have also already very interesting results and pilot projects, also in Africa, a system which called YOMA on discovering talents, local talents in Africa, which resulted into a completely different design after using this standard. So this is, let's say, when we're discussing about design, but we all know that AI is also changing its behavior when it's in development. So it's important to have this monitoring instrument as well, and the certification at different stages. So here it's also something that we developed, and we also piloted with the city of Vienna. So basically defining criteria on how the system is expected to behave. And this includes both technical as well as organizational and social aspects. So here again, it's a big question again, which is also discussed now in terms of the AI Act, how often we need to recertify, if this needs to have an independent body who is doing the certification and so on. And I think that was also mentioned before. I mean, with this speed that we are with dealing right now when we're discussing about AI, we definitely need to be more agile and more adaptive when we are developing these instruments. Traditional standard setting can take years. So I think that we cannot afford anymore to debate years on what do we actually mean with AI. So one way we tried to tackle this is for the certification projects is to move away from the more text-based, standard development process to a more concept-based criteria development that can be very easily adapted also to the context. So this is where I come to adaptability. The big question is always how can we move from the general to the more concrete different sectors and so on. So the way we tackled it in IEEE is, as I said, developing some general criteria for adaptability, bias, transparency, and so on. And then with these criteria, being able to very quickly contextualize it for a specific sector. So we are just working now to contextualize it for mobility, for instance. And
by mobility, do you mean the transport sector or?
yes, autonomous driving, exactly. So there, of course, as well, there are a lot of things to tackle, but there's a specific use case that we are working right now with the domain experts in that field. And I think that's also important. So again, technologies, bringing together these different stakeholders. Normally, you need the computer scientist, you need the domain experts, you need then civil society as well. So this is definitely that we always have to take into account. And I think it was already mentioned, the skills part. So the skills, I think it's important to bring together, so to build again the bridge to speak, to be able to speak the same language. I think that it is no longer enough to have, just technological expertise. You need to have then also other skills as well in the ethical field and the legal field and so on. Maybe not necessarily in one person. You need to have those teams that are being put together. In the 7,000 standard that I just mentioned, we have a new profession, which is called the value lead in an organization, which is at the strategic level and which brings together as a single individual or as a team this different expertise and needs to accompany every project. And this brings me also, and actually when we're talking about skills, we need to start, of course, from the education already at the university level, but this is not enough. I mean, we already have all these technologists out there and the other way around. So we need to bring those skills to the different stakeholder groups. What we're doing now is to start trainings for assessors. So the ones who are being able to assess these socio-technical systems, and we are already at the third iteration. So this is something as part of the competency framework that we are also certifying, if you want, so the individuals, the ones that are being able to do certain things such as assessments. And last but not least, I mean, governance brings everything together. Governance will define what standard certifications and skills are being needed in that specific context. And I think that I would like to end that the aim should be really not to do this mainly for compliance reasons. And I think that was also mentioned before. The aim should be really, if we are looking to the values and we are trying to build the values into the system to actually build better products. And our pilot projects actually showed this, that if you are taking these value-based engineering as defined as standards into account, you come up with a lot of more innovative ideas on how you can build a better product than traditional design methods. So I think that this is maybe on an optimistic note as well. By taking into account, the stakeholder values, you can actually have a business advantage as well.
Thank you very much, Clara. I want to get back to you at some point when we, in a few minutes, when we go back to Norberto to talk about the transparency and explainability issues. But I'd like to turn now to Jose and the government perspective. They're important stakeholders as they are the ones that are actually developing policies to promote AI innovations as well as regulations to ensure its trustworthy and human-centric development. Jose, please share with us how you endeavored to do this as the head of Chile's FAST unit. Does the government of Chile regard use of regulatory sandboxes in particular as a means of experimenting to ensure that the applications can be trustworthy and remain human-centric? And I'll also ask, I'd like to ask Clara and Norberto and Francesca to comment on the sandboxes as well. Jose?
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me. And I want to like take sandboxes, but also something else here. Just a little overview in the beginning. Well, in Chile, we started like a little bit late compared to most of the global north in developing our policies, and that I think that's the case for most of the global south countries. And we faced like challenges not only like as the pandemic during the process, but also we had social riots that it's also something that's happening like in different places in the world. But those kind of crises actually helped us to mobilize people into participating in something that at the moment we didn't think was related, but in the end it ended up being really related in our AI policy process. So crisis could mobilize people into participating in these processes and actually into building governance for AI. So this is something that Clara was mentioning, and I think that is very important. Something that we encountered when we were developing our AI policy was that at the same time we had this technology that was uh, evolving really, really fast, and at the same time we were late. But we couldn't develop principles or laws in record time. So we have like this time pressure, and at the same time we need like a lot of time to engage with people, but at the same time we need to give responses to the public. So some things that actually happened in our process was that implementation and design was kind of overlap. So I really like the idea of this general criteria, but something that happened, and I think it's kind of the philosophy also in regulatory experimentation like sandboxes, is that you can actually design and implement at the same time. And I think that one important thing there is how you can incorporate the public and moving away from this expert non-expert separation that actually is being that is like done a lot of time, and how you can incorporate different publics into that design and that implementation. Some things that we learned in Chile, and we actually engage a lot of people into discussing the policy, is how transparency about the process and actually like giving back to the public what they actually discussed was important to foster trust in the process. And also how showing that AI is not something that is only about the future and about like a very alien technology, but it's something that is actually in their everyday life, and it's actually something that people use every day a lot of times. So three things that I think that are important, and these things happen both when we started the AI policy process and then when we were thinking about the sandbox. And this is something that is an ongoing process. We actually have like an initial design and initial diagnosis, but the sandbox is actually being discussed right now. But what we had for the AI policy is that we faced like two different kind of barriers to involve different stakeholders. And I think that this is something that is usually not mentioned or is not discussed because most of the times we are discussing among experts. So the first one is like in the policy setting, you have like, at least in Latin America, and that this is something that happened in Chile, like internal barriers that policymakers don't want to engage the public that much because they think that non-experts actually don't know anything about the technology, and don't know anything means they don't have anything to say. And that is something that we had to struggle a lot with and discuss with different authorities to convince them that it was important to actually engage the public. And in that discussion, crises like social riots and the pandemic actually helped to lower barriers inside the government to actually have a more participatory process. And that is something that is very important for the socio-technical systems that actually need to reach consensus in all these value tensions that emerge during the process that both of the technology development and the policy development. But something that we encountered afterwards, like we actually kind of lowered the barriers in the authorities, was that there were a lot of barriers outside the government, especially in experts community, that didn't want to engage the public because they felt like they were losing power into someone else defining these policies or defining the priorities of the government. So we faced a lot of resistance, especially in academia, where experts say, why are you going to ask people if they don't know anything about AI? And that is something that happened a lot. So something we discovered and we come up with at the time, it was like a living process, as I said, is the government had to promote actively how different publics were engaged and support those that have that support these different publics in different ways. For instance, for industry, it was important to give them, I don't know, sponsorships. So when they actually engage in these processes and consultations or deliberations, they could show that they were working with the government, and that was something that at a communication level was important for them, but that actually helped them to engage internally to their different stakeholders, that was something that helped a lot. But at the same time, for instance, for like the general public, if you say, I don't know, lay people, something that was important was both showing them that AI was not something alien. So with different things, as simple as a manual on how to use Zoom to engage in a deliberation, to actually showing discussions about AI in different sectors, but at the same time, publicly supporting the participation of lay people, and saying that this is not only an expert issue. And that was something that was done a lot and was really needed to actually engage these groups. And the third thing was actually to go into those that were opposing the government for different reasons and to convince them that their voice were going to be heard. And for that, the process needed more than only one stage. So we had like this deliberation stage and then a consultation stage, and this multiple stage actually made generate trust in these publics, because they could go again, review whatever the government was doing, and actually publicly say what they thought about the process. And that is something that we also replicated on thinking about the sandbox, not only for the policy, but in a smaller scale. How are we going to have a sandbox? How is it going to be designed? In which sectors should it be applied? And that is something that is happening right now. Like we had like this initial process last year, and this initial process was engaging the public in an open way. Like anyone could participate, supporting like different small publics with different things, and actually asking them from the beginning, is a sandbox needed? How a sandbox should look like, because sandbox could mean a lot of different things, and how that could fit or not into our regulation, and at the same time, which sectors could be prioritized. And this last question is really important, especially in developing countries, because like the discussion on AI is intertwined with the development discussion. So anything that you are going to invest into science and technology should have something should generate something into the development of the country. So that is something that is really important to any public, at least it was in Chile. So I think, and just to close, because to go to the next discussion, I think that for this participatory process to actually work, you need time, but at the same time, you need to implement at the same time things as you go with the conversation. But you need to be really transparent on how these different publics are going to influence, support those that are not usually considered, such as like the lay public, but at the same time, as there was someone was saying before, like if you're not incorporating the technical engineers actually in these discussions, why are they not participating? Try to guess why are they not participating and support that gap. Is it a problem of language? Is it a problem of resources? Is it only a problem of inviting them? So try to look for those gaps, and I think that in that the role of the government is to find those gaps and actually support those publics to make them participate, and show them how their participation is actually being taken in account. So like how you go back to the public and show them the results, both in like it could be standards, it could be projects, it could be laws or anything, but actually show how they are influencing the different products of the participation process. I think that was very important for our process, and I think that is one of the main reasons why Chilean AI policy is actually still being implemented. And that is something that has not happened with other Latin American policies, when change of government actually also dropped the policy from the last government. In this case, in Chile was a change of government, a change of governing coalition, and the policy is still being implemented by the new government. And I think that the participatory process is one of the main responsibles for that.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful because what I'm hearing you say is that we've heard a lot about transparency around AI, but I think what you're suggesting to me, it's not only about transparency about the technology and what the technology do, but about the policy discussions and the need for engagement of different groups, and why those groups need a seat at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and also it's like an ongoing transparency. It's not only like showing how it's going to work from the beginning, but also how it generates different products, how it changes, and if there are changes, why those changes happened. So it's like opening the black box of the participation process and the policy process. That is something that is usually not considered.
Great. Okay, now I promised some time to Norberto to talk about transparency and explainability. If you could walk us through that sticky issue. And then also I invite Clara and Francesca to share your views about the importance of regulatory sandboxes and how they should be designed and so forth. Thank you. And then in about 10 minutes, we're going to wrap up. I have some important wrap-up questions for you. But Norberto, please.
Sure. So I'll be pretty quick. I mean, the last point I wanted to make about the transparency and explainability as a principle and how it interacts and communicates with other principles is the fact that when companies are asked to develop these type of explanations, actually they can be focused on on other principles. So you can have an explainability disclosure that talks about responsibility, about information of who is involved in the development, management, or implementation of an AI system. You can also have explanations around the safety and performance of AI systems. And this is all about accuracy, reliability, security, and robustness of those systems. Or you can have explanations about the fairness of the AI system, information ensuring that the AI system is not unfairly biased. So my point very quickly on the principle of transparency, that it can be a window, can be a trigger, promoter of other principles as a way to explain them and how companies are actually implementing them in practice. What I would just to complement this intervention, I would love just to touch base on this issue of regulatory experimentation. I think it is of utmost importance to have multi-stakeholder collaboration in the field of policy experimentation. We all know that AI is emerging as an area of lawmaking activity that presents a number of challenges and questions around what type of regulatory approaches and instruments should be regulating it. We already talked a lot about the coexistence and interplay with standards, but there's also important questions about the existing normative frameworks and how do they actually cohabit with the new ones that are being forged. We also have a number of challenges coming from the technical side of things. AI as a technology also poses challenges in terms of its complexity, for certain models, its opacity, how dynamic it is, how difficult it is in some situations to measure its impact. So what we see is that all of these factors actually derive into a level of uncertainty, not only uncertainty in terms of the effects or impact of the technology, but also uncertainty regarding the effects of the regulation of that technology. So in order to actually better answer the question of how to regulate, I think that experimentation is needed, and we very much welcome all the emphasis and trend around regulatory sandboxes. But I think we can go beyond and do even more on policy experimentation that can complement and enrich the work that is already being done through regulatory sandboxes. So one thing that we've done and managed to put together a program we call Open Loop to connect policymakers and technology companies. And the idea is really to help develop evidence-based input to inform the AI governance debate. This is a collaboration and a consortium of regulators, governments, obviously industry, but also academics and civil society. And what we do is to put into play a number of experimental governance methods, namely policy prototyping. So what we try to do is through this consortium and collaborative effort to test new and different approaches to governance frameworks. And this can be draft legislation, it can be codes of conduct, it can be industry guidelines, it can be ethical principles. And the idea is really to understand how they resonate in the real world before they're actually enacted.
Great.
So think of this program as a sort of regulatory innovation lab, and it's important to look at the spectrum of different methods through which you can do experimentation that can, as I said at the beginning, complement regulatory sandboxes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump around here, and before we ask our speakers to make a final comment and offer their thoughts either on regulatory sandboxes or I have specific questions for you concerning the importance of the multi-stakeholder model in terms of moving forward. But I would really like to poll those who are still available here and online. We have 2 more questions because we're anxious to know the extent to which all of this expertise that has been offered has affected your views. So if we could have interactive poll number 2. Okay, I'll just read it very quickly. Based on what you've heard in today's discussion, how would you prefer to see the AI trust issue addressed? Through top-down regulation of AI by government regulators, through flexible regulation of AI informed by stakeholder inputs, or no regulation at all to maximize innovative potential? How about the first one, top-down regulation by government regulators? Any hands go up on that one? No? How about flexible regulation of AI informed by stakeholder inputs? No regulation of AI to maximize innovative potential. I don't think that, quite honestly, I don't see that happening. I think the consensus in various international organizations is that we need something, a framework or guidelines, guardrails to determine how AI is developed in a trustworthy and human-centric manner. And then our final polling question was, how has today's session changed your views about the potential of AI? If developed and deployed according to the OECD's human-centric AI principles, to be used successfully and safely to promote economic growth and societal benefit. It has changed your views in a positive way, it has changed your views somewhat, or it did not change your views at all. You think AI is just plain scary. Anyone? Take comments from the floor. Mark?
AI is scary.
Yeah, I think thank you. I think I will take these 4 terms. I think the professor said about the interplay of explanation of, the data scientists sitting with the domain experts. And I think I'll take the Norbert point on explainability and adaptation. I mean, again, the innovation will keep going on because it's driven by money. Let's be honest about it, okay? I think the capitalist is sitting in the room. But the idea of social impact on AI, that is where we are trying to really navigate. So there was, banking and financial services, it'll keep happening, right? So I think that 3 layers of how do you put these together for social impact, or as Clara was saying about healthcare, can we really do it? It's a dinosaur. We might vanish about it, but I don't know.
Thank you. We do have a question, an online question from Hina Bashir. I have a question for any of the speakers about how and to what can be for accountability. I guess how to establish accountability for AI. Anybody have any thoughts on that of our speakers?
Well, I can just say, from the experience, actually, for our pilot project with the city of Vienna, the certification that we did with them was on accountability. So basically, it's a mix of criteria, as I mentioned before, of technical and non-technical criteria. Some are related on the organization, the governance, such as, for instance, how you are treating false positives, or what are the lines of responsibility, these kind of things. And others are more technical, like robustness and these kind of things. So it's basically a set of requirements and questions that, let's say, the provider has to demonstrate in order to get an assessment, a positive assessment. So this is the way accountability is treated with our certification criteria.
Okay. Thank you very much, Clara, for that very concrete example. We have maybe 5 minutes, so this will be kind of a lightning round. But we frequently hear about the need for cross-disciplinary, multi-stakeholder approaches to harnessing the benefits of AI. That's been a major theme for the past 2 days. But I want to ask you, what is needed to make such collaboration happen both at the national and global levels? Any ideas?
Room, panelists?
Yeah, anybody from the room? No? Please, go ahead.
Okay. Well, of course, there's like these million-dollar questions, right? But I think efforts that, for example, the OCT does are interesting this way. But I have the feeling that it still has a lot of issues of how making it more open. And I know that maybe it comes historically from the way that well, intergovernmental discussions have been developed, and I know the OECD tried to be as open as possible and bring civil society and business representatives, but it's a challenge because you see by the number of the representatives on the meetings, and I'm just giving the OECD as an example because the panel has this background, but we can see this in other in other
Global, multilaterals.
exactly. So maybe that's one first point, trying to see a way of having more different stakeholders and communities having their voice on these debates.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that's what we're anxious to promote within the context of the UN's consideration of the Global Digital Compact, the importance of having all stakeholders participate in that. The second question I want to pose to our speakers today is, are you generally encouraged that stakeholders take seriously the challenge of harnessing this technology in a human-centric, transparent, and accountable manner so that it works for humankind? I think Mark is a little bit anxious about, about what he sees, but I would welcome the perspectives from Francesca and the OECD.
Yeah, thank you for that fantastic question. It's definitely a difficult one. I think we're making small steps. Many private companies, for example, have AI ethics teams and that actually look at these types of issues. Our colleagues today have mentioned in the session that discussions on trustworthy AI happen in silos, of course, and we need to make sure that AI developers are involved in these consensus-building discussions. But even moving beyond that, I think something to mention here is that good intentions don't always translate into trustworthy AI, and Clara touched upon this as well. Even AI that's developed with the best of intentions can cause harm and unintended consequences and outcomes. I think what Karine mentioned earlier, I think there's an importance here to focus on collecting and sharing evidence on AI. And I think an important initiative in this space might be that at the OECD, we're actually developing an AI incidents database to better understand the harms and risks that arise from advancing AI systems, which could definitely provide useful insights and forward-looking insights as well in this space. Thank you.
Hi, Barbara.
Please, Nicole.
Jose Antonio, he also has his hand raised. I wasn't sure if you
okay.
could see that.
I could
Clara did earlier, as well as Karine, just to let you know.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Whoops. Thank you, Nicole. Jose, please.
Yeah, very. Oh, there. Yeah, very short. I would repeat one thing again, for the question of how to engage like multiple stakeholders. I would say again transparency in the process, like and how and to what level they are going to be able to influence in these different processes. And at the same time, I wanted to address Ariel's question in the chat about how
Please.
if there should be like different tools for emerging countries or not. I would say like yes and no. I think that the like the ideal scenario is actually so that developing countries could be part of this discussion. That is something that is happening, but didn't happen at the beginning. I remember when I started as part of the OECD network of experts back in 2019 as the representatives of Chile. There were like 2 or 3 members of Latin America, and that increased on time. But if you look to AI principles. Before 2019 or before 2020, there are only 1 or 2 developing in emerging countries or the global south, and are almost all in Europe or the US. So I think that we should aim to have like this more ideal, like general criteria that we could adapt to to the specificities of developing countries, but to do that, we need that developing countries are actually included in these discussions. I think that the OECD has done that in the last few years. The UNESCO effort also has pointing toward that direction, but I think it's not enough. Because we actually have like these development issues, we have like less technical capability in some ways. We have like different regulatory systems, and I think that how can we adapt these discussions into the developing world is still a great challenge.
Jose, thank you very much for that very candid perspective from the work that you did in Chile. We are out of time, unfortunately, but I want to sincerely thank all of our speakers for generously sharing their expertise and their insights about the challenges we face. I think these discussions certainly will continue for the rest of this week. And I know, based on what I observed in the AI Governance Working Party earlier this month in the OECD, that there is a very robust agenda aimed at implementing these principles, which I look forward to participating in as a member of business at OECD. So sincere thanks again to my speakers, to all of the individuals who hung in with us here, and thank you very much, and I hope this conversation continues. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, goodness, I'm sorry. Yeah.
On the...
Yeah, no, so you were able to get that point in about the...
translating intentions into...
Yeah, no, that was an excellent point.
It was just
No. I was frustrated by some of the speakers at the end.
I actually think it's best. I'm not a seasoned speaker.
No, and sometimes, I mean, like in the high-level session yesterday, the moderator was just merciless. I mean, she was just cutting people off.
There were a lot of moderators who could do that. But no, I think it was good. Because
well,
technical issues,
yeah, I just...
by Ryujan. First Light by Och. Summer Vibes by Mike Leet.